Whoa. Yes, sir. I made it. I didn't know if I was gonna make it tonight, but I did. We're here. What is this? But we're doing this a little special tonight, so I gotta go in here and edit some stuff before my viewers get here. So pretty much just talking to myself, but for those that see this after the fact, how you doing? Good to see you. You know, good to see you. Wait, I think a few people have made it. There they are. There they are. Hold on, let me customize some stuff right quick. Bam. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Bam. Oh, yeah. Boom. There we have it. This is a members only live chat. Shout out to my members. But before we get into this thing, what up, AOK Mafia? It's your boy Artofkickz, and just like that, we back with another one. So, we doing Mr. Ballin' tonight, man. We doing Mr. Ballin' tonight, and this is a members only chat. I just turned it on. I had to go in there. Look, y'all beat me to the punch, man. Y'all clicked on this video and started viewing it so fast. I don't even know how many comments was left before I was able to turn on the members only thing. Y'all are quick. Y'all are very quick. We only been in here a minute and a half. We already got 200 people. There's 200 people in here with us right now. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. But I see y'all up in here. What up, Jackie? What up, Angel? I see you. What name is that? I see a Jackson in there somewhere, but that's all I know. That's all she wrote. But y'all, we got a Mr. Ballin' video here today. We're gonna check it out. Ooh, the title of it is Horrific Accident Caught on Live TV. Mature Audience Only. Uh-oh. What up, Desiree? Got my moderators in here. Steve, Desiree, how y'all doing? Good to see y'all in here. Yeah, we're about to get this party started. Y'all boys, girls ready? I'm ready for a good storytelling, man. I'm in that kind of mood. I hope y'all are as well. Let's
The only way to do this story justice, in my opinion, is to include the graphic video footage. And so we have done that, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload.
Y'all, I just got finished eating too. Your boy real full. Every time I do a late night live stream, I get to yawning because I be eating first, and then I get the itis. I be wanting to fall asleep.
So you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
I'm like a baby. After I eat, I want to sleep. Oh, wow, y'all. Viewer discretion is advised. I do not know what this man is about to be showing in this video. I know this video is going to get yellow marked. I'm pretty sure his is yellow marked too. So, keep that in mind. Viewer discretion is advised.
On January 27th, 1908, a 34-year-old handcuffed man walked out from behind the curtain to a cheering crowd inside of a theater in St. Louis, Missouri. This was going to be this man's first ever live performance, but he did not seem nervous.
Ah! I found the little hidden treasure thingy that Mr. Ballin be doing. I saw Leonardo DiCaprio in the audience. Ah! He's right there. I found him. I wasn't even looking. I just saw a shadow man. I was like, what the heck?
Performance, but he did not seem nervous.
1908, that was a long time ago.
Next to this man on stage was this comically oversized milk can that was filled to the brim with water. Once the audience had stopped clapping and had calmed down and taken their seats, this man on stage turned to face this milk can and then climbed up this small ladder and then lowered himself feet first into this can. And as he did, his body displaced water from the can, causing it to spill over onto the stage. And then once almost all of his lower half was submerged in water and the audience could only see his face, this This man looked over at his assistants in the wings of this theater and kind of gestured to them that he was ready to start. And so the assistants come running out into the middle of the stage, and they immediately close the lid of this milk can over this guy, pushing his head down into the water. And so as the audience is gasping and collectively holding their breath, the assistants proceed to lock this lid with 6 different locks around the top. And then they wheeled over this cabinet that kind of collapsed around the can, so it was totally out of view of the audience.
Oh, no. No. Not me. Nope. No.
Now, for this audience, they had never seen anything like this before, and so immediately they all began murmuring and whispering to each other, wondering how this guy is going to survive what he's doing. But 2 minutes after that lid had been sealed, that 34-year-old man emerged from behind the cabinet with his hands open wide, so he wasn't handcuffed, totally unharmed. And then the cabinet was moved aside, and the audience could see the lid of this milk can was still locked.
Should I say what I think happened? There was another person inside that can, and they sacrificed that man for this magic trick. Magic trick.
During his lifetime, nobody could ever figure out how the great magician Harry Houdini had escaped that milk can. These dangerous stunts made Harry extremely famous, and it's why we still know him today, nearly 100 years after his death. But it wasn't just that he was able to successfully perform these stunts, it was his attitude while he performed these stunts that made him so notable. He really just came off as being totally fearless, that he was willing to do just about any stunt. But that wasn't actually true. There was one stunt that Harry was absolutely terrified of. Now, he would eventually work up the courage to attempt this particular stunt, but while he was doing it, he panicked and he had to be rescued by his assistants. And after that, he never tried it again. And for decades, nobody else tried it either. Because, I mean, if Harry Houdini can't perform this stunt, then certainly no one else can either. But in 1990, a daring 32-year-old man named Joe Burrus decided he would be the person who would finally conquer this infamous stunt.
He looked foolish enough. Hey, Luke, happy birthday to you.
Joe was a small-time children's magician in Fresno, California, but deep down, he had always believed that someday he would be the next Harry Houdini. In fact, he would actually tell his family that not only would he be the next Harry Houdini, but he would be even better than Harry Houdini. And so that year, he decided it was finally time.
You can try to be better, but you'll never be the late, great Harry Houdini.
To make that dream a reality. And so he saw performing this infamous stunt as a way to make that happen. So on Halloween night of that year, so October 31st, Joe, adorned in his white tuxedo, along with his 2 young sons and his parents, they arrive at Blackbeard's Family Fun Center, which was an amusement park in Fresno, California. The family hopped out of the white limousine that Joe had arranged to bring them there, and they began walking across the parking lot to this big crowd of people. And when this big crowd of people saw Joe walking towards them, they all began to cheer. Joe's stunt that he was about to perform that night had been very heavily advertised, mostly by Joe, and so it had become this spectacle in Fresno. It was going to be aired live on TV while he was doing it, and it was going to be broadcast on a radio station. So after Joe and his family make it over to this big crowd, Joe walks to the front and he climbs up on this impromptu stage, and he gives this impassioned speech to his audience about how he's going to be the one who...
He did this on my birthday, man. I don't remember this story very well, but I do recall hearing about it.
Takes on this stunt and becomes the next Harry Houdini, and then afterwards he looks over at his assistants, all these guys that are around him, and he gestures to them that he's ready to begin. And so with all these TV cameras rolling, the assistants walk up to Joe and they begin shackling his wrists, and they put these chains around his body, and then they lifted him up and put him inside of the see-through plastic coffin. And then this coffin was lowered into this...
Yeah, I remember now. I remember very well.
7-foot pre-dug hole that was right nearby. Once Joe gave the signal that he was ready to go, they would fill this hole in, and the stunt that he would perform would be to escape being buried alive.
Yeah, that's crazy. Even Houdini didn't want to attempt this stunt because that dirt that's going to be piled on top of this man, you know, the only other person that did this successfully, one of the other few, was Mr. Beast. But that box that they put him in, that thing, nope, that thing was not going to break.
Houdini had attempted this by being buried under 6 feet of dirt. And he had managed to get out of his coffin, but then he just could not get through the dirt and began to panic. And had it not been for his assistants literally reaching into the dirt and pulling him out, Houdini would have died. Yeah. Joe, apparently, a year earlier, had attempted some sort of practice run of this stunt. It was not the full amount of dirt. It was some smaller amount of dirt, and he had managed to get out. And so he was really confident in himself. And so for this big
I remember that
televised event, he had decided to really up the ante and make sure it was clear he was not only as good as Houdini, but better than Houdini. And so he was going to have 3 feet of dirt put on his coffin first, and then 4 feet of wet cement put in on top of that. Many people, when they heard this plan, both the TV personalities, the radio personalities, onlookers, they said this was a terrible idea and you shouldn't do it.
Man, it's scary enough to put dirt. This fool want to put 4 feet of cement on top of... No.
But Joe was extremely confident and brushed them off and said, I know what I'm doing.
You know, Houdini failed at this and he was only using dirt.
Once Joe was in his coffin at the bottom of this 7-foot hole, he looked up at his assistants standing over the grave waiting for a signal, and he gave it to them and kind of shouted up to them that he was ready. And so his team very excitedly began shoveling dirt into the hole. But after only a couple of minutes, when less than a couple of feet had been put in the hole, they heard Joe yelling out from inside of the coffin. And so everything stopped, the staff jumped in, and they pulled the dirt out until they could finally get the lid of the coffin off. And they found Joe. He was alive, but he was very shaken up, and he kind of sat up and said, yeah, the chain around my neck is too tight. You got to readjust the chain. Now, all these onlookers at this event, they heard Joe say this, and they saw him, and their read on this situation was not that his neck chain was too tight, but rather, it looks like Joe might have bitten off more than he can chew. That this stunt is way more dangerous, and maybe he's realizing that, and he's looking for excuses to not do the stunt. Yeah. And so the onlookers, they didn't try to egg him on to do it anyways. They started feeling apprehension too. And so everybody who was there began telling Joe, hey man, get out. Don't do this now. This is a really bad idea. It's not worth it. The chain's too tight. That's a sign. Don't do it. Don't get back in. But Joe, after kind of collecting himself, told the group that he was totally fine, that it was really just the neck chain that was the only issue. And he demanded his staff put that chain back around his neck after they loosened it up and then put him back in the coffin and fill it in. And so eventually his staff, taking cues from him, said, okay, and they got his neck chain readjusted and they put him back in the coffin, they chained him back up again, they closed the lid, and once again he gave the signal that he was ready to start. And so,
man, what's crazy, I've seen this video before.
A very apprehensive crowd watched as the dirt went back in, and after 3 feet of dirt were in the hole, the cement truck came over and poured 4 feet of wet cement on top of the dirt.
And you see the moment when the cement collapses, like, oh.
And then after this hole had been completely filled in, the onlookers, which included Joe's 2 young sons and his parents, they kind of moved in and got right up against this grave and were looking straight down at the top, waiting for Joe to come out again. But as they're watching this hole and as they're filming this hole...
Watch. You're going to see it. You're going to see it collapse.
All of the cement in the hole suddenly drops about a foot.
Oh, my God. Woo! Oh, my God. I remember it like it was yesterday. This entire video, I remember like it was yesterday.
What had happened was the nearly 15,000 pounds of dirt and wet cement sitting on top of this coffin had finally caused the lid to break, and in an instant, all of the dirt and cement poured into the coffin surrounding Joe completely. He was truly buried alive. Onlookers immediately jumped.
They couldn't do nothing fast enough. They couldn't. Nope.
Into action and did their best.
He had seconds to get out of there, and it took them minutes
to try to dig Joe out, but it took them 30 minutes to finally reach him, and when they did, he was already dead. Joe had ironically died on the exact 64th anniversary of Houdini's death. After an investigation, it was determined that Joe had not tested the strength of his plastic coffin against the weight of the wet cement. he'd only tested it against dirt because that was the one he had done the year earlier. He had done it under dirt and it worked. Joe had also not taken into account that cement dries from the bottom up. So even if Joe had managed to get out of the coffin and make his way through the first 3 feet of dirt,
he wouldn't have made his way through that daggone cement. What was he thinking? Cement? Like, how was he expecting to breathe trying to make his way through 4 feet of wet cement?
Was right on top of the coffin, he most likely would have been trapped under the hardened cement layer.
You realize that cement starts to harden first at the lower elevation, so it's going to be hard.
You mean it hardens at the lower part? I thought it started at the top.
No, it hardens at the lower.
No. In fact, I shouldn't even kid. This is very serious. This is no magic trick.
This was a doomed mission from the start, but because Joe was so confident in himself and his ability to do the stunt, no one stopped him.
He thought Houdini was one of the great escape artists, and he wanted to be better than Houdini. And he was close.
So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comment section. If you got something out of...
We got another video here, y'all. We got another video. It's going to be the last one. This video here is she made one of the worst decisions ever. Hence the title of this live stream. I'm very, very curious to hear what this video is about to be. So without further ado, let's check it out.
Are 2 elements of today's story that are bound to shock you. The first is just, how could anyone allow this to happen? It's so awful. How could you do that? And then the second is just the severity of the punishment that was handed down for it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. If that's of interest to you, please hold the like button at gunpoint and force them to walk through puddles in their socks. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Hey, Mr. Ballin and I use the exact same subscription button animation on our videos. That's cool.
In 2001, Greg Biggs was a 37-year-old self-employed bricklayer who was living in a homeless shelter in Fort Worth, Texas. He was also the father of 1 child. He had an 18-year-old son named Brandon who lived with Greg's ex-wife. Despite not living with his son while his son grew up, Greg had always made a point of spending lots of time with Brandon, and so over the years, they had become quite close. But besides his son, Greg really struggled to build meaningful long-term relationships with other people. It was like no matter how friendly and outgoing he was, people would just come into Greg's life and would leave very, very quickly. This made Greg, who always had struggled with his mental health, feel very isolated and lonely, and
wow, him and I have the same issue.
And desperate for human interaction. And so on the rare occasion where people did come into Greg's life, a new friend or a new love interest, he was always so excited to try to please them and keep them around that he would often go overboard with his generosity and his willingness to do things for these people, to the point where he really set himself up for being taken advantage of. Case in point, 2 years earlier, a woman had kind of suddenly come into Greg's life, and Greg very quickly fell in love with her. And early on in their relationship, this woman tells Greg that she's struggling financially. And without any hesitation, Greg started giving her all of his money. Now, Greg was not a wealthy man, not by a long shot. And so before long, he had literally given this woman all of his money, to the point where Greg could no longer make truck payments. He couldn't make house payments. And so his vehicle and his home were repossessed. And then after he's suddenly homeless and destitute, this woman who he's given all his money to, she also disappears. But despite being in this horrible situation of sudden homelessness, Greg made the best of it. Anytime Greg was not working, he would be trying to make plans with his son Brandon to go walk around the mall downtown or go see a cheap afternoon movie. Times were definitely tough for Greg, but Greg stayed positive. He was a forever optimist, and he did this by focusing on the future. He was certain if he could just land a few more good-paying gigs, he could make that extra cash and finally buy a home again and buy a vehicle again and finally kind of get his life back together. But unfortunately, he would never get that chance. On the morning of October 27th, 2001, two men called the Fort Worth Police Department to report having seen something suspicious on a park bench inside of Cobb Park. Cobb Park is this big public park with playgrounds and walking trails and fields. And at the time, Cobb Park was not considered a very safe place to be, especially after hours. There was lots of shady people in the park. So when the Fort Worth Police Department gets a call about something shady happening in Cobb Park, they aren't surprised. And so they dispatch a single detective to go over to the park and meet these two guys and see whatever suspicious thing is on this park bench. And so this detective, he goes over to the gates of Cobb Park, he meets these two guys, and they kind of explain what they saw. They give him directions to this bench, and then he thanks them. He hops back in his cruiser, he drives through the gates, and he starts driving down the trail, and then he pulls off and parks his cruiser, knowing that the bench in question is right around the corner, maybe 200 or 300 feet away. And so he parks his cruiser, he gets out, and he starts walking on this cement path. And as he's walking, he can't see the bench yet, but as he's walking, he sees there are deep tire tracks in the grass and mud off to the right side of the walking path. So he's mentally kind of taking note that somebody had been driving inside the park fairly recently off the trail. And so he keeps on walking and he begins to make that turn, and he sees up ahead the bench in question, and he can clearly see these deep tire tracks go right up to the bench. And then as he begins to make that turn and he's maybe 30 or 40 feet away, he can actually see what's on this bench. And he can see this big lump that's kind of wrapped up in what looks like a rug or a blanket. And then as he gets closer and closer, he can finally see that very clearly there is a person inside of this blanket that's kind of laying out on this bench. And when he's about 10 or 15 feet away, he can see it's a man, and this man is clearly deceased. So this detective, he walks right over to the bench and he's looking down at this body, and he can see the right arm on this guy is very badly broken, and his right leg is also very badly broken. And then his left leg is not only broken, but it's been partially amputated. In fact, the left leg is barely hanging on. And so this detective, he's looking at this guy thinking, okay, this person must have gotten wrapped up in the shady criminal dealings that are known to take place in Cobb Park, and somebody beat him to death, or they beat him and then shot him to death. But as he's looking at the body, despite these extensive injuries, the bruising on his body was not consistent with someone who had been beaten to death. And in terms of potentially being shot to death, he began looking at the body, and from where he was standing, he could not see an entrance or an exit wound of a bullet. And so stumped, the detective steps back and is just kind of pondering what he's looking at when he realizes there's very little blood anywhere near the bench or on the body. And considering the left leg has been nearly amputated, you would think there would be lots and lots of blood, but there wasn't. And so that indicated to the detective that his injuries had to have been sustained elsewhere. And so this detective, he calls in backup, and more detectives show up, and they're all kind of looking at the scene, and the working theory became, okay, this guy got killed outside of the park. We don't know how he got killed. It looks like some sort of blunt force trauma, but somehow he gets killed outside of the park, and then his killers, they drive him into Cobb Park, which is why you have those deep tire tracks on the right side of the path, and they dump him on this bench. Yep. Later that day, the medical examiner would come out and positively identify the body as belonging to Greg Biggs. The same day that Greg was found, the police went out and began their investigation, and they started by interviewing people that had been in Cobb Park either that day or in recent days, and they also interviewed known criminals that they knew went into Cobb Park, and they reviewed CCTV footage both in the park and outside of the park. But no one knew anything about what happened to Greg, and the footage didn't show them anything interesting. And so very quickly, Greg's case began to languish, and no one knew what to make of it. Then, in February of 2002, so roughly 4 months after Greg was found, the Fort Worth Police Department received a phone call. It was from this young woman named Miranda Daniel, and she said, I know what happened to the man in the park. And the story she would tell them at first was so hard to believe that the Fort Worth Police Department weren't sure if this was a prank or not. But when they followed up on her lead and they went to a very specific address that she had mentioned, they realized she was telling the truth. This is the unbelievable true story of what happened to Greg Biggs. On the evening of October 25th, 2001, so 36 hours before Greg was found in Cobb Park, 25-year-old nurse's assistant Shantae Mallard arrived at her friend's apartment in Fort Worth, Texas. Her friend was named Tittalisi Rice. She went by T-Fry. Shantae was from a very loving and stable household in Fort Worth, Texas. Her parents had raised her to be kind to other people and to always work hard and to stay out of trouble. And by and large, Shantae acted accordingly. But in her late teens and early 20s, Shantae began to secretly rebel against her parents. On the surface, when she was around her parents and her family, she was the goody two-shoes that always followed the rules. But when she was away from her family, specifically when she was with T-Fry, she would let her wild, rebellious side out. The two friends had met in 1999 at a nursing home where they both worked as nursing assistants. T-Fry had just gotten out of this very toxic marriage, and so when she met Shantae, she was actively looking for someone to go out and party with and go be free and meet other new people. And Shantae, when she's meeting T-Fry, she didn't necessarily know she wanted to do those things, but being around T-Fry, it was like this whole other side of life was opened up to her, and suddenly all she wanted was to go cut loose with T-Fry. And so very quickly, these two women really connected over their mutual desire to go have fun at any cost. And before long, they were not only drinking and doing drugs and partying on the weekends, but they were also getting high before work, which meant they were treating patients high. So with that in mind, fast forward back to October 25th, and Shantae has just arrived at T-Fry's apartment. And so Shantae, she goes up to T-Fry's apartment, and the two start drinking some alcohol, and they start smoking some weed, and they split an ecstasy pill. Ecstasy is a big party drug. It's kind of like a cross between being a stimulant and a psychedelic. And so after these two women are fairly buzzed on these different substances and they're feeling ready to go, they leave T-Fry's apartment, they go down and they climb into Shantae's car. And Shantae drives the two of them to a local club called Joe's Big Bamboo. And so the plan was they were going to meet this guy named Cleet Jackson, who was Shantae's love interest. And the plan was they would hang out at the club with Cleet, and then at the end of the night, they would all leave, and Shantae and Cleet were going to spend the night together. And so Shantae and T-Fry, they arrive in the parking lot of Joe's Big Bamboo. They park their car, they get out, and they meet up with Cleet, who was outside of the club, and the trio kind of sneak off from the rest of the people trying to get into the club, and they smoke some more marijuana, and then the trio, they go into the club, and they start having drinks, and they're partying, and they're dancing, and they're having this great time. And then at some point in the night, Cleet kind of abandons Shantae and T-Fry, and he goes off with another woman he met that night in the club, and he would actually leave the club with this other woman, and he would vanish for the night. And so around 2 a.m., when the club is getting ready to close, Shantae realizes that Cleet, the guy she was going to go home with, he's gone now. And so she's very frustrated, but she doesn't really have any recourse. And so she instead just goes and finds T-Fry and says, hey, let's just leave. And T-Fry, she's ready to leave too. And so the two women, they leave the club and they get out to Shantae's car, and both women are clearly under the influence. They're both definitely inebriated, but T-Fry believed she was less inebriated than Shantae was, and so she should drive. And so she told Shantae, get in the passenger seat, I'm gonna drive. Shantae gets into the passenger seat, T-Fry gets in the driver's seat, and she leaves the club and she drives all the way back to her apartment. When she parks at her apartment, she gets out and says to Shantae, hey, I don't mind getting in my car and kind of trailing you as you drive back to your home to make sure you get home safe, kind of like an escort. And Shantae, she just gets out of the passenger side and walks right around and confidently sits in the driver's seat of her car and tells T-Fry, nope, I'm fine. I'm gonna drive myself. I'll see you later. And then Shantae drove away. About an hour later, at 3:30 in the morning, T-Fry is in bed in her apartment when she gets this very frantic phone call from Shantae, who's totally hysterical. She's beside herself, and she's not really making any sense, but she's trying to get T-Fry to come over to her house.
I have an assumption, but I'll save it.
Now, T-Fry did attempt to figure out what was going on, but she just could not cut through the hysteria on the other side of the phone. And so eventually T-Fry just thought, you know what, clearly it's something serious. I'm going to go see what's going on. And so T-Fry, she leaves her apartment, she gets in her car, and she drives over to Shantae's house. And when she gets there, she goes up to the front door, she opens it up, she walks inside, and she finds Shantae in the kitchen straight ahead. She's totally hysterical, she's crying, and she's telling T-Fry that she didn't mean to do it. She's so sorry. And T-Fry's telling her, hey, calm down, what's going on? And Shantae says, look in the garage. And so T-Fry, she walks straight ahead through the kitchen to the door in the kitchen that leads into Shantae's garage. And
my assumption is that she hit that man with her car. Driving intoxicated. Driving under the influence of multiple substances.
She opens the door up, she turns the light on, and in the middle of the garage is Shantae's car. It had been parked nose in and lodged head first in the windshield on the passenger side of this car was Greg Biggs. When Shantae had left T-Fry's house an hour earlier saying she was fine to drive, on her drive home, she had barreled into Greg, who was on a sidewalk of some street, and the impact was so hard that Greg went flying through the windshield and got lodged halfway inside of her car. But the impact didn't kill him. It did almost cut his left leg off and break several bones in his body, but it didn't kill him. In fact, there was blood spatter inside of the car on the passenger side that indicated Greg was totally conscious and was trying to pull himself back into the car. There were these handprints on the inside of the passenger side door indicating Greg had been pulling on them. There was also these very small droplets of blood all over the seat indicating that Greg had been spitting up blood as he was trying to talk to Shantae or as he was trying to plead for help. But Shantae, instead of stopping her car and getting this guy help, she just kept on driving home with Greg lodged in her front windshield. Now keep in mind, where she hit him, she was less than a half mile from the fire station where her brother, her older brother, was currently on duty as a fireman. He was medically trained. He could have saved Greg's life. Also, the other firemen at the firehouse that she knew, that Shantae knew, they could have saved Greg's life. Also, less than 6 miles away from the point of impact was the local hospital, where of course they could have saved Greg's life. And then on her drive all the way back to her house with Greg halfway in her windshield, she would have passed by 9 payphones, where if you don't know anything about payphones, you can dial 911.
Free. For free.
So emergency services, and it doesn't charge you anything. So Shantae at any one of these payphones could have called medical personnel who could have saved Greg. Oh.
She needed to be put in jail. She just was not a good decision maker whatsoever. The first mistake that she made was deciding to get behind the wheel of a car and drive herself home without the assistance of her friend trailing behind her to make sure she was all right. She shouldn't have got in the car, period. She should have either crashed at her friend's crib or been driven home. Thank God we have Uber now.
Also, let's not forget, Shantae was medically trained. She was a nurse's assistant and understood basic life-saving. But she did not use any of those resources. Instead, she just drove home. And when she got to her home, she drove her car with Greg in it into her garage. She shut the garage door. She gets out. And as Greg is literally moaning and probably pleading for help at this point, she just says, "I'm sorry," and then walks up to the door that leads into the kitchen of her home. She turns off the light in the garage, walks into her kitchen, and shuts the door behind her, trapping Greg in the garage in total darkness by himself. Then, after an hour of Shantae just being in her house with Greg slowly dying in the garage, she calls T-Fry. T-Fry comes over, she looks in the garage, she sees Greg, and T-Fry's reaction is she just totally loses it. She panics, and she's screaming at Shantae, "Call 911, call paramedics, call the police." But Shantae refused. She didn't really give a reason, but she just said, "No, I can't." And then shockingly, T-Fry also does not call anyone. The two of them just turn off the garage light.
This is the dumb duo. Dumb duo. That's what they are. Two best friends, dumb as heck. And they was raised better. At least one of them was. T-Fry, whatever the heck her name is. She was raised better. She was a daggone nurse assistant or whatever the heck she was. Just dumb.
Again and shut the door and leave Greg, and they hop into T-Fry's car and they drive to T-Fry's apartment.
Hey Casey, you caught that? I did that on purpose. I'm surprised you caught that. I'm surprised anybody caught that.
Where they sleep for several hours. And then when they get up that morning, they go back over to Shantae's house and they check on Greg, who's now motionless. And at this point, Shantae, she calls Cleet Jackson, the guy who she was supposed to go home with at the club but had abandoned her for some other girl. She calls him and says, hey, I have this huge problem. I need you to come help me. And so Cleet Jackson has no idea what he's walking into, but he goes to her house and he goes through her kitchen. She opens the door and he looks into the garage and he sees Greg in the window, and he's furious with Shantae because now he's gotten involved and he doesn't really know if Greg's alive, and he doesn't really know what to do because he's on parole, and if he gets wrapped up in this, he'll go back to jail. But he ultimately decides he's just going to help Shantae because he believes at this point Greg is dead. So there's nothing they can do to save Greg. And so that night, Cleet gets in touch with his cousin Tyrone, and the two of them, they go into the garage and they lay out a carpet next to the car, and they both kind of awkwardly apologize to Greg, who's just stuck in the windowsill, and they yank him out, they put him into the carpet, they roll him up, they put him in the back of one of their cars, and they drive to Cobb Park. They go through the gates, they make their way over to that bench, and they drop him on the bench. There had been some discussion about maybe destroying the body, burning the body, but Cleet felt strongly that they need to put his body out somewhere in public so at least his family can identify him and bury him. After his body was placed in the park, Shantae told Cleet and Tyrone and T-Fry not to tell anyone, and they said they wouldn't. And within a week of Greg's body being discovered, Shantae was back at Joe's Big Bamboo partying it up as if nothing had ever happened. But eventually, T-Fry would tell a couple of her friends, and before long, word had gotten out. And one person found out about it that was kind of in the network of these people, this woman, Miranda Daniels, and she really didn't like Shantae. And so she was the one who actually called the police. And
I'm not saying this right, but if you got a secret this freaking major, how dumb would you be to tell a single soul outside of the people who were involved that swore to secrecy? This woman over, look, you can't, no, we can't even be friends. We cannot be friends if you over here telling secrets. Are you kidding me? Oh my God.
Turned her in. And when the Fort Worth police followed up on Miranda's tip and they went to Shantae's house, they went into her garage, and there was her car with the windshield still obviously busted in from something being smashed through it, and there's blood all over the inside of the car, and there was some obvious attempts at trying to destroy evidence inside of the car. The seats had been taken out, some things had been burned, but none of the attempts Shantae had made had actually destroyed any of the evidence. During the trial, the medical examiner who had done the autopsy on Greg Biggs said his injuries would not have killed him right away. Now, he didn't know for sure how long he would have been alive, but he believed it could be as long as several hours or maybe even up to a whole day. And during that time, Greg was just trapped inside of this pitch black garage. No one's coming to help him, despite people coming in over and over again that he's pleading with to help him.
Like, think about that. Think about that. Think about yourself being him, right? And because I can imagine, I can see myself in this situation. I'm battered and bruised, broken arms. I'm freaking halfway hanging out of a freaking car windshield. And over an extended period of time, there are people that are in my proximity, and none of them got enough of a brain to be like, yo, let's see if we can get this man some help. And I can't verbalize to them that, hey, I'm still alive. all I can do is just be a freaking a vegetable and allow them to just do whatever with me that they please. Could you imagine? It sounds like a movie. It's like it had to happen that way in order for this story to exist. It's crazy.
And he would have been in excruciating pain. He's got several significant broken bones. His leg has been nearly amputated. He's got cuts all over his body, and he would have been trying to pull himself out of the windshield, and every movement he was making would have been sending the jagged pieces of metal and glass into his body. I mean, this is a drawn out, horrible death. And during the trial, every single medical professional and every single law enforcement official said, had Shantae brought Greg to get medical attention at any point in the first couple of hours, just basic medical care, he would have lived. And so his death is entirely because of Shantae's absolute indifference. T-Fry,
absolute stupid.
I would ultimately, in exchange for full immunity, testify against Shantae, and Shantae would ultimately be found guilty of murder.
What's crazy is she was found guilty of murder. What's crazy is they fit the look that I was thinking of. She seemed like she would be the wild, crazy type that would influence the other woman to do some stuff, like to be into drugs and partying and alcohol and all this. She seemed like the one that would influence this woman. It's crazy. Now, my mother, she somewhat resembles my mother to an extent. And my mother had a friend. I can't remember what her friend name was, but my mother had a wild friend that she used to go out and party with like that before I was born.
Be found guilty of murder of Greg Biggs, and she would be sentenced to 50 years in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2027.
In cause number 037.
Dang, she'll be eligible for parole in 2027.
152D stop.
How many years is that? 40?
State of Texas versus Shantae Juan Mallard. Verdict form is to count one. We, the jury, having found the defendant, Shantae Juan Mallard, guilty of the offense of murder, assess her punishment at confinement in the institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for a period of 50 years.
As for Cleet Jackson and his cousin Tyrone,
all you had to do was drive that man somewhere to get some help.
They received 10 years and 9 years, respectively, for their role in the crime. During the victim impact statement portion of the trial, Brandon...
I would have been so mad at that woman. I'm like, you stupid idiot. You got me involved with your mess, and look, now I'm doing 10 years in prison because you stupid. All you had to do was drive this man to get some help. But no, you stupid...
Biggs, Greg's son, he took the stand and he very eloquently told Shantae that he forgave her, and it seemed very genuine and it moved Shantae to tears. And then Brandon looked out at the audience where Shantae's family was and he said, you know, not only do I feel horrible for my family, but I feel bad for your family, Shantae, as well, because this crime has destroyed all of us. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please hold the like button at gunpoint and force them to walk through puddles in their socks. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 1 or 2 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested, go to shopmrballin.com. If you want to learn about upcoming deals and promotions for our shop,
man, that is so wild. That is so wild. The image of her sobbing looked very familiar. I feel like I might have seen that image before, but without knowing the context behind it, without knowing the story behind why that image existed. But dang, that is crazy. Just imagine how many other stories there are out there that we are unfamiliar with of incidences that occurred, tragic incidences, somewhat like what we just saw here. But hell, knowing Mr. Ballin, he gonna find them stories and he gonna share them with us. But man, I'm out of here. This was it. That was crazy. But y'all know what time it is. You like this live stream, you like hanging out with your boy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, stay tuned for more. As always, you can follow your boy on the gram and Twitter at Artofkickz. The link to the original will be down in the description box below. And I'm going to catch you guys in the next one. Y'all be safe. See ya.